Excelsior, true believers! You are about to embark upon a journey, a trip to the 70s and 80s when mighty Marvel Comics ruled over all. The Defenders, Doctor Strange, the Champions, Deathlock, the Submariner, the Incredible Hulk, Killraven, the Son of Satan, the Macabre Man-Thing, and all your other Bronze Age favorites every week appearing on Defenders Dialogue. Now here are your guides, Christopher Golden and Brian Keene.
Excelsior, true believers.
Excelsior indeed, and welcome back once again to Defenders Dialogue. I'm Brian Keene.
And I'm Christopher Golden, and Brian, this is an exciting day for me, my friend.
Because you just got done shoveling a foot of snow?
Yes, because I just got done shoveling what I think is well over a foot of snow. But, my wife and I disagree on measurements, which I know many men have that difficulty. In any case, no, because we just got done shoveling snow, and our old friend Tom Snagoski, as I mentioned to you before, his city of Stoughton, Massachusetts, won the snowfall lottery yesterday. They had over 30 inches of snow on the ground, but yet here we are recording. I don't know what episode of Defenders Dialogue this is.
I can tell you if you vamp for me here real quick.
Well, I know we're closing in on episode 150 soon.
This is episode 147.
147. And today,
I did math on my hands. That means we have 5 episodes left.
After this one, yeah. And today, we are discussing Marvel Spotlight number 5, which is the first appearance of the modern day Ghost Rider.
That's right.
We say modern day Ghost Rider. Go ahead.
Yeah, this was one of your picks, and I am so glad you picked it. We've talked about Ghost Rider. He was a member of both the Defenders and the Champions, who we've covered on this show, and the Legion of Monsters, who we've covered on this show. But we've never really talked about him as a solo character.
Right. We've never said, old cowpoke went riding out one dark and windy day. Listen, I got to tell you, I was reading, I read this, even though I have the originals, I read this in the Marvel Masterworks Ghost Rider, and it has a great introduction from Roy Thomas. And Roy gives sort of the history of the character, and what I find really fascinating about it is that it's difficult for people to imagine that such things happened once upon a time. It started with a song that I just sang the first line of, by Vaughn Monroe, famously re-recorded in later years by a million different acts, but famously by both Johnny Cash and in a very different version by the Outlaws.
Yep.
And for me, the Outlaws was the one. That was the song, the version that I knew for the first time and loved so much. But in any case, it's a great song, folks. You should look it up if you're not familiar with it. But the song inspired a Ghost Rider character to appear in a comic book called Tim Holt. It was created by, writer and editor Roy Crank. No, the writer was Vince Sullivan. The editor was Roy Crank. And the artist was Dick Ayers, who was a very famous comic book artist at the time. He had some backup appearances in 1950 and then appeared in 1951. What you may not know, those of you who are familiar with that Ghost Rider character, the company was called Magazine Enterprises, a very original name. What people may not know is that was not published by Marvel Comics. So the original Ghost Rider, the Western Ghost Rider that we're familiar with, if we're Marvel fans,
right,
was not a Marvel character. But one of the very few people reading that comic at the time was the editor at Timely at the time. Timely would eventually become Marvel. And That editor, of course, was Stan Lee. Years passed. The Ghost Rider character was not being published, and the company went out of business. And in that era, if you didn't publish in a certain amount of time after that, your rights basically vanished.
Exactly.
So Marvel took the abandoned trademark of Ghost Rider. They did their own version of that Western Ghost Rider. They just changed the name of the character, which apparently you had to do at that time. And then that rested for years. That went 8 issues, and it rested for years until 1972, Brian. And without going into too much more detail about this, suffice to say that the team of Gary Friedrich and the great, one of my absolute favorite Bronze Age artists of all time, Mike Ploog.
Yep.
Who gave us extraordinary runs on Werewolf by Night and The Monster of Frankenstein.
And Man-Thing.
And Man-Thing. And that reminds me, Brian, one of our final 5 episodes needs to be about the Monster of Frankenstein comic book series.
Yes.
Ploog was the one who designed the flaming skull-headed biker version of the Ghost Rider. And to that end, Brian, before we move on to anything else, tell our audience what it was like to be a kid growing up in the 70s where stunt bikers were the heroes of our time.
Oh, my God, yes. I was just talking about this with Mary San Giovanni a few days ago. We had no shortage of heroes in the 70s. There were athletes we could look up to. There were veterans we could look up to. There were astronauts. But for me, as far as real life heroes,
there was the $6 million man.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to go fictional, yeah, we had even more. But for me, for real life heroes, nobody was bigger in my mind than stunt motorcycle driver Evel Knievel. This was a guy who got paid, who made a living jumping his bike over things, and every day of summer. And every weekend I was out doing the same. I had a BMX mongoose, and I would build ramps. And first I would just practice jumping off the ramps. Then I would line up things and jump over them. People think I'm bullshitting when I tell this story, but Mary can vouch. She's heard it from my parents. I jumped my bike into the top of an oak tree, got stuck in the tree. Hurt myself, but amazingly not bad. It was just, like cuts and scrapes. But I was terrified to climb down. And the little girl I was trying to impress and my little sister, they go running across the farm, and they get my dad. He comes marching out, and he looks up in the tree and he says, "Well, you got yourself up there. You can get yourself down." And then he turns around and walks away.
Mm-hmm. That seems to sum up the kind of parenting I would expect from Brian Keene's dad.
Yeah. I mean, hey, look, I love my father, but he was a man of a different time.
Well, I'm not criticizing. I'm saying you seem like a lad who was formed by self-determination.
Oh, yeah. In the 4th grade, 2 bullies chased me off the bus, chased me all the way to the house. And he was out in the field working, and I looked at him for help as we were squaring off, and all he said was, "You better kick their ass or I'm going to kick yours." Now, I don't want listeners to get the wrong idea. My father wasn't physically abusive. He would not have kicked my ass. He certainly was not above spanking me when I deserved it, and I frequently deserved it. But that was his parenting. It was, learn to fend for yourself, boy, because I'm not always going to be here to teach you.
Mm-hmm. And now you just tell Mary all the time, "Mary, I deserve it. I deserve it."
Yeah. But yeah, I was a huge Evel Knievel freak. I had his toys. I'd watch him every time he was on TV. And then, Marvel comes out with Ghost Rider. Now, I did not read this issue. I didn't discover the character until he was in his own series, but it was one of those early Bronze Age issues.
Well, let's I want to talk a little bit more about Evel Knievel before we get on there, because for people who are unfamiliar, for anybody younger listening to this who don't really get Evel Knievel, and maybe you've seen the Evel Knievel stunt cycle toy and didn't realize it was based on an actual living human being who's not living anymore. Evel Knievel probably is the cause of more idiotic accidents, like Brian just described. More kids. I mean, I wiped out so hard on my bike a couple of times trying to do idiotic stunts. I had one of those banana. We talked about this before. The lowrider like chopper.
Oh yeah.
The yellow banana chopper bike. I remember going down a path in the woods. Stupidly, no hands, Brian. This very steep path. I'm just like, no hands. I'm good. I'm cool. And the front tire hit a rut in the path, and the steering wheels turned 90 degrees, and I just went ass over tea kettle. And at the speed I was traveling, needless to say, I mean, I didn't break anything miraculously, but I went bouncing down that path, scraping everything I could scrape. And I blame Evel Knievel. I blame my own stupidity, but an entire generation did stupid shit because we couldn't be Evel Knievel. And the thing about Evel Knievel is that the Jackass guys grew up watching Evel Knievel.
Absolutely.
But unlike you and I, or unlike you and me and every other guy of our age, we realized at a certain youthful age that we couldn't do that stuff without really hurting ourselves. But Evel Knievel could. So these guys hurt themselves for a living because they couldn't be Evel Knievel. I'm convinced that's what it is. But Evel Knievel tried to jump the Grand Canyon
right
on a motorcycle. People also should realize that to give a little bit of history of the phrase jump the shark. Jump the shark refers to the moment in a TV series life when the TV series sort of breaks the illusion that it's not fiction, because something on it happens that is so stupid that the audience can no longer follow it, right?
Right.
And it refers to an episode of the TV series Happy Days in which the Fonz, played by Henry Winkler, jumped a pool full of live sharks on his motorcycle. So the phrase jump the shark comes from that episode of Happy Days, and that episode of Happy Days and the character of the Fonz literally existed because of Evel Knievel. So
exactly.
We go back to all of this. The Ghost Rider, the John Clay's Ghost Rider wouldn't exist without Evel Knievel.
Exactly. And you touched on something there I want to talk about. Like I said, we had all kinds of people we could look up to, but I never thought I could be one of these athletes that other kids in school looked up to, and I knew I couldn't be an astronaut. But Evel Knievel,
you weren't going to be Muhammad Ali.
I wasn't going to be Muhammad Ali. I wasn't going to be Buzz Aldrin. But Evel Knievel, I was like, well, all this guy does is jump his bike over things. I think I could do that.
I have a bike.
Yeah, but you're right about the accidents. The worst I ever got hurt, I tried to jump my bike over a barbed wire fence. Now, for those of you who don't live in the country, barbed wire, when it goes in your skin, it doesn't just pull right back out. It rips chunks. It's barbed for a reason. And I got hurt bad. It ripped chunks out of the back of both my legs. I've still got the scars to this day. And when they were stitching me up, the emergency room doctor was like, let me guess, you were playing Evel Knievel. Yeah. He sighed like, I don't know how many kids he must have seen.
Right.
But fast forward to just last weekend, we get a snow and ice storm here. My 13-year-old, his mother asks him to take this old office chair that they're getting rid of out to the garbage can, which is at the bottom of their driveway. Now, he didn't just carry it down. He thinks about the guys from Jackass, and then he sits down in the chair, and he rides it down the ice-covered driveway.
I mean,
and hurts himself.
I totally get that, though. Why wouldn't you do that?
Well, yeah, his mother's like, why would you do that? I looked at it, I'm like, he's not doing anything I didn't do. I said, this is a rite of passage.
I mean, if I had a chair that I had to bring down and the driveway was icy, I probably would still do it.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just, look, again, giving more context to the creation of Ghost Rider, the other thing that Evel Knievel was the antidote to the other major motorcycle element in American culture in this era, which was the post-Easy Rider era, where America was now very familiar with the idea of the existence of motorcycle gangs, biker gangs. Hell's Angels had just been doing security at the Altamont Music Festival a few years earlier, or a couple of years earlier, and killed a guy while the Rolling Stones were performing at the Altamont Music Festival. The reputation of biker gangs when we were kids was, worse than Satanists, basically, right?
Yep.
And in fact, and I've talked about this before, one of my sister's best friends and her boyfriend were both murdered by a motorcycle gang in Framingham, the town where I grew up in like 1972, thereabouts. Long story, but one of my sister's close friends, and I remember it to this day. So Evel Knievel was the antidote to that. Evel Knievel was so whether you were modeling yourself after these biker gangs or modeling yourself after Evel Knievel, there was a certain amount of danger and fascination to motorcycles in general in this era. This is when they really came off. So taking the Western Ghost Rider and putting him on a motorcycle instead was a stroke of marketing genius. And because horror was the hit thing at this very moment in Marvel, Klug was designing Ghost Rider and basically gave him a flaming skull head, because why not? and then it was like, let's come up with this idea and make him a demon, sort of. And I got to tell you, I cannot overstate the influence on me of these early issues, especially.
Yes.
So, but you said you'd never read Marvel Spotlight 5.
No, I never read this one until, oh my gosh, it must have been sometime in the 90s maybe. But I did discover the character fairly early on in his series, and it was hit or miss at my newsstand. Around the time our friend J.M. DeMatteis came on the book, which was near the end of Ghost Rider's run, my newsstand started carrying it regularly every month. So I read all of those, but it was hit and miss for me, the early adventures, whether I could find them or not.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I'm remembering this correctly because I don't have it in front of me, but I think that the Marvel Spotlight ran to, it was 5 to 12, I think, with the Ghost Rider issues. And then the Ghost Rider series went for like 81 issues.
Yeah.
All with the original motorcycle Ghost Rider, Johnny Blaze. There have been several since then, but for me, Johnny Blaze will always be the classic.
Exactly.
Ghost Rider. Again, I can't. Anyway, we'll go to the beginning. I hope that you'll show not only the cover by Mike Plug,
but the splash page as well. Yeah.
Of him riding in the rain. Again, it's written by Gary Friedrich and drawn by Mike Plug, who penciled and inked this first issue. And I'm sad that he didn't continue inking. But on this, because it doesn't look nearly as good when it's not him.
Agreed.
But it's just so tremendous. We open up with the Ghost Rider just riding through the rain, and these kind of thugs see him, and he knows that they're doing. I think he even witnesses a stabbing or shooting. He witnessed a shooting.
Yeah, they shoot a guy. Rob him.
And he just keeps going.
Yep. Yeah, this is not a superhero. He just keeps on riding past.
Right.
And these thugs are like, hey, that guy might be able to identify us in court, and they start chasing him in a car. And what does the hero do? He runs from him on his motorcycle. He tries to outrun him.
Yeah. Well, and he does. He basically blocks their way with fire, and then he leaps his bike over a conveniently erected jump. And then, daylight comes, morning arrives, and he transforms back into Johnny Blaze. Basically, this issue's just an origin issue. But we don't have to sort of go into too much because it tells the story, and we can just We could just go through that. But again, let's talk about the art, Brian. I mean, this uniform of Johnny Blaze's, the page after he transforms back, when you see him as Johnny Blaze for the first time, that page where he's standing in the middle of the layout.
Right.
Not only is it a great page, but that's the first like really good head-on view of the costume, which is actually his like biker outfit. It's so cool.
It is. It is.
I mean, I wouldn't look good in it, but you might.
It looked unlike anything any of the other Marvel characters were wearing at the time.
Right. Yeah.
You know, it's not colorful. It's not gaudy. There's no cape. There's no repulsors. It's just black leather and a really cool belt.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, we get the history. His father was a stunt cyclist named Barton Blaze, who was one of the who was the partner of the owner of this stunt cycle show, whose name is Crash Simpson. Now, I don't know about you, Brian, but if I wanted people to have faith in my abilities on a motorcycle, I wouldn't call myself Crash. But suffice to say, his name is Crash Simpson. And when Johnny's mother's not in the picture, so when his father, Barton Blaze, is killed, Crash Simpson and his family, his wife and his daughter Roxanne, take Johnny in, so he continues to be a part of the show. But Mrs. Simpson makes Johnny promise after he has an accident on a motorcycle, makes Johnny promise that he will not ride a motorcycle.
That's right, and we should talk about that because it weighs heavily into his decisions later on.
It's on her deathbed, by the way.
Yeah. You know, he and Roxanne, obviously they're not blood related, although they are brother and sister. They're growing closer, as you know, kids that age will, and they're practicing together. And the bike catches on fire. Johnny gets the bike clear of the circus tent. Does his best to save everybody, but his adoptive mother comes running toward him to see if he's hurt, and the bike explodes, and that's what kills her. So, he's already feeling a lot of guilt over that. And then, as you said, on her deathbed, she makes him promise that he will never ride in the show.
Right. He'll never be a part of the show, take those risks. But Crash Simpson does not know that he made that promise, and neither does Roxanne.
That's right.
Initially. And so they think he's a coward. They think the reason he won't participate is that he's a coward. Eventually he decides that he made the promise that he wouldn't ride in the show, but that wasn't a promise that he wouldn't ride. So he takes to practicing privately, to mastering the bike for like 5 years. And Roxanne sees him practicing, and the whole thing comes out. She realizes that, or he tells her what the secret was all along and the reason that he won't participate in the show. And Roxanne and Johnny, that's it. She realizes he's not a coward, so she's free to love him, and their romance blossoms.
Right. But then bad news. They they book a show at Madison Square Garden. They should be elated, but they find out that Crash himself has cancer, and he's been given a month to live.
He won't live long enough to join them in Madison Square Garden.
That's right. He says, I wish I had a son to take over. And, he looks pointedly at Johnny, and Johnny says to him and Roxanne, no way, I can't take over even if I wanted to. And this is the only part of the issue that I had a problem with. Roxanne knows he promised her mother this on her deathbed. But then she goes back to calling him a coward again and says, it'll cost you my love forever. And, Crash is disappointed in him, and Johnny's had enough. So who does he turn to for help?
Well, as you do in a case like this, Brian, I feel like, first of all, I understand why Roxanne has this change of heart, because I think she's just learned that her father has a month to live. He's dying of cancer, and that will be the end probably of their stunt show. And she feels probably that surely now Johnny will will rise up and forego the promise he made to her mother and all of this stuff. And so she's very upset when he doesn't do that. And Johnny knows that, he's not going to ride, but if Crash dies, not only is this his father figure dying, so as any ordinary young man would have done in the 70s, he turns to Satan.
That's right. He gets, we're never shown what the book is, but, maybe it's Marvel's Darkhold. Maybe it's that Simon version of the Necronomicon you could buy at Walden Books back in the 70s and the 80s. We don't know. But he turns to Satan, summons Satan, and Marvel Satan, who we've seen before when we covered the Six-Fingered Hand saga, shows up, and Johnny makes a deal. He says, grant my wish and I will serve you faithfully. I ask that Crash Simpson be spared from the deadly disease, which is killing him.
Yep, of course. And again, in most cases, many people would have turned to whatever god they grew up believing in. But Johnny, randomly and without any other outside influence, without anything in his history to suggest he even has access to such books, decides. Now, for people who are unfamiliar with why Johnny would do that, it was the early 1970s. In the early 1970s, satanic panic was rife. As far as the parents of, it was like the Rainbow Party of the early 1970s.
Yes,
it was it was sending nudes to whatever.
I am legitimately surprised because they show Satan on the panel. They call him Satan. They don't call him Mephisto or any of the other names Marvel has.
Yep.
I'm really surprised they got this past the Comics Code Authority, but they did.
But again, this was the era of The Exorcist. It was the era of, and they had a character who appears just a couple issues later in the Ghost Rider story, who was the son of Satan.
Right.
This era, the only thing hotter, no pun intended, than Evel Knievel was Satan. So combining Satan and Evel Knievel was a stroke of genius.
So we fast forward 3 weeks later. We're at Madison Square Garden. They're setting up for their biggest show ever. And Crash has decided that this may be his last performance. So he's going to go for the world's cycle jump record. He's going to try to jump 22 cars because he'd rather go out like that than dying in a hospital bed.
Right. And Johnny doesn't say, wait, I made a deal with Satan to keep you alive. He just says, you're crazy, you're going to die. And Crash's attitude is, well, look, I'm dying anyway. What difference does it make if I die like this? I'd rather go like this. And of course, he tries to jump the 22 cars, does not make it, crashes and dies horribly. The crowd is in shock. Roxanne is crying over her father's corpse. Johnny's solution is in memory of Crash, to tell the organizers, to tell the audience not to leave, because he gets on his motorcycle and he successfully jumps the 22 cars. Maybe it's to keep the show alive. Who knows? But whatever it is, reasonably, Roxanne is like, what the hell is wrong with you? My father just died, so you go out and you're like stealing his thunder?
See, again, you and I disagree on Roxanne's motivations here. I'm like, what is wrong with her? He just did this for her.
But he didn't do it for her. But anyway, he broke his promise. He goes in, and then Johnny goes back to his dressing room or his room or whatever it is, and he's furious, and he summons Satan. He's pissed off. They have an argument, and Satan basically says, because Johnny's like, hey, I told you, I made a deal, my soul, to keep Crash Simpson alive. And Satan's like, no, dude, it's the letter of the agreement. I am Prince of Lies. I agreed not to let him die of cancer, not to let him die. So then Johnny finds out his head bursts into flames and his skull is revealed. Roxanne comes in and witnesses this moment, of transformation, but only for a second. She realizes it. Oh, and this is. She knows exactly what's happened.
It's Roxanne that cast Satan out because, as it turns out, she found Johnny's books on devil worship.
Yes, I forgot that.
Without his knowledge.
Yes, because what she says as she goes in, and she says, let's see. As the cross is to a vampire, so is the presence of one pure in heart to you. Disappear, I command you, or the forces of good within me will destroy you. And I can't help thinking that this is a reference to virginity in this era, right? Because in this era, like in all the horror movies from that era, it's all about virgins. I don't know.
You might be right. You might be right.
In any case, yes, Roxanne has secretly been studying Johnny's books on Satan.
So Johnny thinks
Satan was everywhere then.
Yeah, Johnny thinks it's over. The next night, no. As darkness steals over New York City, his head starts throbbing. He feels like he's burning up with a fever. And then some of Plug's best work this issue, his head and arms and everything bursts into flame.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sweet, man. It's so good. The panel of his skull and he's screaming no is so perfect from this era. And then we finish up. He's on his bike riding, and he's the Ghost Rider.
Yep.
Now again, it's a few issues later where we see the Son of Satan come in and all this, but I gotta say, like, we talk so much on this show about our youth, and I feel like in so many ways, nothing strikes more chords of those days than all the elements that go into this story.
Absolutely.
Like this character and this story wouldn't have happened in a different era.
I agree wholeheartedly. Of all the issues that you've picked as we wrap up the show here, this is my favorite. This is definitely my favorite. I have a pick for next week.
Excellent.
That, much like this issue of Marvel Spotlight, I don't think you could have done it in another era. Because also during the 70s, you may remember... Huh?
Is it the Human Fly?
No, it's not the Human Fly. You'll remember, of course, Eric Van Doniken, Chariots of the Gods. Yep. That was everywhere in the 70s. Leonard Nimoy's In Search Of, and all these, was Earth visited by ancient aliens? And Marvel got in on that with Jack Kirby and the Eternals. Specifically, next week, we're going to do the Eternals issue number 8. I picked that issue because it was my introduction to the Eternals, but B, I think the Eternals ran 21 issues, and of all those issues, I think this issue best solidifies Kirby at the height of his powers in the 70s.
All right. I want to tell you that I'm going to get in trouble next episode.
Why?
I'm gonna say blasphemous things.
Well, let's get into a little bit of it now.
We should bring Tom Snigoski in for that episode.
Okay, I'm down for that. It's been a while since we've had him on the show. Let's do it. I've never been the kind of Kirby fan that everyone else seems to be. Right.
I understand intellectually how 95% of comic book art from the era was built on the foundation of Kirby.
Right.
But I've never been a really big fan, number one. And number two, the stuff that he wrote, I've never liked.
Oh, now, don't get me wrong.
His Demon.
Yeah, his 1970s dialogue
yeah.
was corny as fuck, even to little Brian. reading at the time, I'm like, people don't talk like this. This sounds like grandma and grandpa talking here.
But I will next episode, remind me, and I will talk about. Did I tell you this before, that I did the very last interview with Jack Kirby while he was alive?
No, we need to get into that next week.
Yeah, I did the last Jack Kirby interview.
All right.
So yes, Eternals number 8 next week, and also
next show, Eternals 8.
I wanted to talk about Daredevil this week.
Do what?
You wanted to talk about my Daredevil novel experience.
We do, yeah. Do we have time, right? Hold on, let me check.
I mean, I can sum it up. I mean, it was.
No, don't sum it up. I want to hear the whole story. We're only 35 minutes into the show. We got time. Go ahead.
Well, so look, I when I had written my first novel or two, and I was contacted by the editor who was working for Byron Price at the time. His name escapes me, and now I feel really embarrassed. In any case, I was asked. They basically said, we want to bring somebody in to be an outside editorial coordinator on these books who is both a writer and really knows the Marvel comic stuff.
Right.
And I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. But about 3 or 4 weeks, I was waiting for that deal to sort of come together. And then they came to me and they said, actually, we've decided to use somebody in-house. And that person in-house who took over running that program was Keith DeCandida. And as a sort of consolation prize, they said, but here are the characters we have the rights to. We're going to do 4 novels to start or whatever it was. And you have your pick. You can do whichever one of these you want to do. And I picked Daredevil.
Right.
So I was fortunate enough to have that sort of entree. And at the time, there had never been a Daredevil novel, or I should say an original Daredevil novel. So I don't know if there'd been a novel adapting. I don't think there had been.
I don't think there had been.
It was the first Daredevil novel. And because of Frank Miller's run, and again, I was a fan of the whole thing. I mean, Gene Colan was, as you know, a big hero of mine. So I go back to, Matt Murdock and his twin brother, Mike, and, all that stuff. But the Frank Miller run was just such a huge influence. And I was young enough that I didn't pause to think you should absolutely not have the gall to do this. When I said, okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a novel that picks up at the very end of Frank Miller's last issue of Daredevil. So my original draft of my Daredevil novel, which is called Predator's Smile, picks up right at the end of that Frank Miller series. And it was so early in the process of them doing these Marvel novels that the process of approvals wasn't really in place yet.
Right.
So they were letting the editors at Marvel, who edited the comics, kind of approve the pitches and stuff. And Ralph Macchio was the editor of Daredevil at the time. So he was the one who looked at the outline and was like, yeah, this is great. My outline involved, because I was reading a lot of Andrew Vox at the time, and I was passionate about the topic as I still am, my outline involved Karen Page, who at the time in the Frank Miller comics had just come out of a porn career and a heroin addiction. So she'd been addicted to drugs and involved in porn, but she was sort of putting her life back together. And it involved Karen Page finding out that one guy that she had worked with in porn was now doing child pornography. So I wrote a novel that was about Daredevil basically beating the shit out of kiddie porn operators and saving these kids and all this stuff. And it was that plot, but it also had a plot with assassination and Bullseye.
Right.
And nobody said I couldn't do it. So I had like a scene of Bullseye, like in his sort of civilian identity. I think still one of the best scenes I've ever written, which was Bullseye in a pool hall as a civilian. I think it's a flashback, actually. Yeah, because he was a professional baseball player,
right,
once, and he failed, and all this shit happened. So he was getting shit on by all these guys in the pool hall, and he then killed everybody in the bar by with pool cue and chalk and pool balls and
right,
whatever. And throughout the whole book, there's a voice talking to him in his head. He's clearly very insane in the book.
Right.
And Ralph was good with all of that. But by the time I finished the novel, the process of approvals had changed. And someone else was in charge, some higher up at Marvel in a suit was in charge of approving these things.
Right.
And they read my book and they were like, you can't do this. You can't talk about child pornography in a Marvel superhero novel. So they came back and the pendulum swung all the way the other direction. They said, not only can you not mention pornography in any way or drugs in any way, but you can't have any children in jeopardy in any way.
Had they read their own comics?
Well, wait. This was following on from Frank Miller's run with Karen Page, who is an ex-junkie, ex-prostitute, ex-porn star.
Right.
But I wasn't allowed to write about Karen Page and mention drugs or pornography. So I had to basically cut half the book and rewrite it from scratch with a whole new plot with all of that. So fortunately, and God bless, or Odin bless, Laurie Perkins, who was my agent at the time, and they would never, ever allow this to be in contracts now for media tie-in books. Laurie had put in a line in the contract that said, the author shall not be required to make substantial changes beyond the scope of the approved outline.
Good for her.
And that had gotten past them.
Right.
So I remember so clearly sitting down with Byron Price and Keith. Poor Keith was at the same meal at New York Comic Con.
Right.
And Byron was basically saying, you have to do X, Y, Z. And I said, Byron, the contract says this, which he knew, but he was trying to basically bully me into doing it.
Right.
And I said, here's the deal. You can pay somebody else to rewrite it and take my name off of it, because the contract allowed for that as well.
Right.
I said, you can pay somebody else to rewrite it and take my name off of it, or you pay me to rewrite it. One way or another, you have to pay somebody to rewrite it. Right. So I did get paid. I got paid to rewrite the book.
Did you save the stuff that you cut out and ever use it elsewhere?
There is somebody. I've only ever given it, I think, to one person, and I've got to. I know that at a certain point I had the complete manuscript, the complete original manuscript. I think I have it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I have it.
Whatever university gets your papers after you are gone, that's going to be a treasure right there.
Yeah, I'd have to find it. But yeah, so I think I have it. I don't know that Marvel would. I should ask them. I should say, would you let me do a limited edition of this book? But yeah, so that's the story of my Daredevil novel, and I mean, I will say, and Keith said this at the time, and I don't disagree with him. I do think that the version of the book that eventually got published is a better novel than the one that I originally wrote.
Right.
It's a better book, but it's not nearly as interesting a book.
Right.
But yeah, man. So yeah, the first, and it was weird because I was just in the right place at the right time. I was really lucky. I wrote the first ever Daredevil novel. I wrote the first 3 ever X-Men novels.
Yep.
There had been I think might have been an adaptation of one X-Men story prior to that. I'm not sure. But yeah, the first ever X-Men novels.
Yep. Which are collected in a nice omnibus edition.
And I have an agent talking to Disney right now about how come I'm not receiving royalties on that. But
it's funny. I don't have an agent, but I'm talking to Disney right now about why I'm suddenly not receiving royalties.
Oh, on
a lot of
on
us. All the stuff I've done for Marvel, with the exception of Thor: Metal Gods, which was done through Serial Box.
Okay.
But yeah, everything else I've ever done for Marvel, I've suddenly stopped receiving royalties for.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's always an interesting business, this one. But
it is.
But yeah, so that's the story. That's the story of my Daredevil novel.
Well, Excelsior to that, my friend.
And Excelsior to you.
And we will see you back here next week, folks.
Out one dark and windy day.
No, sing as I close this out.
What's that?
I said sing as I close this out.
No, that's good. That's enough. That's all you're getting.
Next week, Eternals 8. Jack Kirby, Tom Snagosky joining us. Hopefully we can get him. I know he's really busy these days, but
we'll get him.
We'll get him.
Built him into it. It's his birthday next week. Maybe we'll record on his birthday.
All right, that's perfect. Perfect. All right, see you then, folks.
Excelsior!
Defenders Dialogue. You can listen to this episode and all previous episodes for free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play Music, and wherever else podcasts are available. Defenders Dialogue is written and produced by Brian Keene and Christopher Golden. Our theme music is by Xander Harris. Our engineer is Matt Wilderson. Check out his books on Amazon.com.